Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Transection podcast. Thanks for joining us on last week's where we spoke to Ariel Mary-Ann Shaw, who is a black trans woman, an activist, and very theatrical person. It was such a pleasure to interview her. And this week we're talking to Max Davies, who is a doctorate researcher at Brighton. They've got a master's called Raising Theybies, which is all about not gendering your children from birth and letting them explore that and find out for themselves before we apply labels and things. That's quite a radical idea for some, but actually there's lots of scientific basis for that, and Max goes into that in great detail. They're just starting their PhD at the moment, and I think they're also they've also got a class. They're also sort of teaching at a university as well, so they really know their stuff. I'm always just so in awe of Max and how much they're doing to really get all of this stuff sort of out in an academic way and scientifically backed up and stuff. So in this episode, Max talks about navigating pregnancy as a trans and non-binary person, and also a lot of the work and the studies that they've been doing, and what a lot of those studies are telling us about parenting and how we gender our kids and how it all works. I mean, it's very factual. It's not too, there's no finger pointing. So don't worry if you're a parent who's parented their children in the traditional way. That's fine. You're not in trouble. But there is, as always, lots of new and fascinating, interesting information. And I think what Max is doing is amazing and just so interesting. And I'm really interested in the benefits of what they're doing and how they're parenting their own little one, who is so cute, by the way. And so yeah, I hope you find it as informative as I did. I'm always amazed at how much information is packed into Max's brain. It's just absolutely astounding. If you haven't followed us on social media already, we're on Facebook, the Transection Podcast, Instagram at Transection Podcast, and Twitter at TransectionP. Enjoy this episode. Hi, and welcome to this episode of the Transection Podcast, where I'm joined by Max Davies. Max talks about gender-neutral parenting and is the founder of Raising Theybies. And I've wanted to interview Max for ages and ages, so I'm glad that I finally cornered them and got them to do it.
Yay.
So Max, just tell us... Sorry, say that again.
I'm excited, yeah.
Good, yeah, me too. So Max, tell us a bit about like where you live and who you live with and what you're up to at the moment.
Yeah, so I live in like Worcester. It's not far from Birmingham. It's a bit of a small city. I was born here and I seem to migrate back here every now and again. I don't actually like living here, but my family here, so that's what I enjoy most about obviously being here. But yeah, so and at the moment I just live with myself and my 2-year-old River, who I'm raising under gender creative parenting, which we'll probably talk about a bit more later. And I'm currently pursuing my PhD in social science, sociology, and I'll be looking at the children's experience of gender creative parenting, because for my master's I did the adults' ideas of what the children were thinking and feeling and how they went through it or going through it. And I'm looking to focus more now on the children. And I should be starting my teaching in Birmingham in January as well. So I'm preparing myself for that as well. And I'll be teaching advocacy to undergraduates, which will be quite cool. So I'm a bit busy, but you did corner me. So you got my time, which is great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds a bit mental. I've only just sort of in recent times become a really productive person again, which I know is not we shouldn't glamorize that. But yeah, I see the amount that you do on Facebook. You know, you're like, oh, I've done this now, or I've written 400 words for that, or like I've got an interview for this. I'm
Yeah.
just amazed. You're like Sonic the Hedgehog. Constant.
It seems more exciting when you can just put it in short on Facebook though, but when in real life it's like, I've spent, obviously for the book chapter which you're mentioning, I wrote like 8,000 words. I had to like give myself like a 200 word a day limit, so every time Ripper went to bed I just give myself 200 words, and I had to just push through that every day because I only had a month to do it, so you don't see like the whole month of stress. But yeah, you're moving from one thing to another. It's quite fun, exhilarating I suppose, but it can get tiring and you can get burnt out. So I think giving myself small bites rather than doing like, oh yeah, I'm just going to do everything all in one day, I'll just crash.
Yeah, I think you can easily enter burnout when you don't pace yourself and think
Yeah,
about like the long game.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Definitely.
Max, you and I have been connected on Facebook for a while, and both of us are sort of activists around like trans and non-binary things, and you particularly are interested in kind of raising children in a way that allows them the freedom to kind of choose or tell you who they are. But where's your journey begun with the whole sort of thing about being non-binary and you know, all that stuff?
Yeah. Well, I think it's probably for most people, I assume, and for myself strongly, it's always been ongoing. For us as children, what we're doing is learning what we're being told, and then also we get to a point where we're fighting what we're being told because that's not how we feel, and that's not what we're drawn to. So it's predominantly been there. It's always been there, but for the first couple of years, you just assume what you're being told is right because everyone else is doing it. But it's your internal dialogue saying, actually, this is not right, and these clothes aren't right, and this is not how I want to express myself, and my hair being this long is not right, and yeah, these clothes inhibit my ability to be able to do the things that I want to do, like sports and stuff like that. So yeah, so for when I was a childhood, if you want to go back that far, I've always been like a tomboy. It's always those labels, standard labels, tomboy, and then you grow up and then you're a lesbian, and then you're like a butch lesbian, and then it just gets like that, and these stages that you go through, and then you'll start noticing that most people are going through these stages because you're going through these stages of what you're learning, but then also you have to follow these stages almost because it's socially acceptable, and that's the only word you get. The word you get given is like the next stage will be like, okay, so you're a lesbian now, and that's the word you get given, and you're like, okay, so I'm to deal with that, think about that. And the next stage, it's like you get given the word of butch lesbian. So I didn't find the word transgender until I started connecting with the internet, and I wasn't really online until I was like 23. So it's like I didn't have any words to describe myself until then, until I could immerse myself in technology to be able to find a community. So, and then after that, I was like, yeah, this is how I feel. This is it. This is who I am. And then so obviously I followed that path and stuff. And then since transitioning, since I've top surgery, I realized that actually I'm neither or anything. I'm actually really quite content with who I am. And I don't really need a label in the sense that I'm a trans man. I don't feel like I'm a trans man, and I don't want to step into that label because I'm, stepping into a space that I don't feel is mine. And that's when I really feel like the non-binary title is me, and I don't really feel like, because obviously I don't take like testosterone, I don't take hormones. I have contemplated it quite a few times, but it's never been something that I've been strongly drawn to. So I'm not to say that I wouldn't step into a trans man category if I was to take testosterone and hormones, but I won't know until I get there. So but right now I'm quite content with who I am, but that wasn't until top surgery. So it's like I had to have top surgery to realize, wow, I'm actually so comfortable with my body and so comfortable in my mind of who I am as a person. Clothes, I'll wear whatever clothes I want. I'll do whatever sports I want, and I'll use whatever pronouns I want and see how it fits. And to me, they then fits better than he, him. But I'm really not that bothered even if I get misgendered now, because it's my presentation is what people are reading, but how I feel inside is it feels good. So I'm not bothered about how people read me so much. But so that brings me to present day, really. So I'm living in this like yeah, fluidity. I'd wear whatever I want. Most of the time I'm masculine presenting. That's probably why a lot of people will use he him pronouns until I start speaking. And then I'm all like, hi, how's it going? And then yeah, people still put me in like a she category after that. So and then but in the queer community, a lot of people are quite happy and easy to use they them pronouns. And so I kind of just I'm kind of fluid in person, but I'm quite fluid in like society as well. I'm just go with the flow. But you know, I understand that's not the same for everyone at all, but it's a journey, and a lot of people, you know, they don't realize who they are to the full extent until something happens. And I didn't realize that until top surgery happened for me. So I'm open if people you know, are changing, because when you feel different and you look different, you might identify differently. So yeah, I hope that explains. Yeah, that's pretty much how
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
you know.
Do you think that, like, was there a time when you were quite sensitive about how people addressed you, and maybe you had like a bit of social dysphoria like earlier on, but now you're happier, like it doesn't really bother you? Is that?
Yeah, definitely. Like every time I went through a stage, it was almost like I had to affirm that's who I was. You know, you're being told socially that's who you are, and you're affirming that identity. So when people would come in at the beginning, and they will call me a boy or a lad, and this was like when I was younger, I had to strongly affirm that I wasn't. And then it's like the next stage when you know, people affirm that you're a lesbian, or you're a lesbian if you're with a particular type of person, or if you're with a female, and you're affirming and you're making those, you have to, you're almost like, and I think back at it now, I think I was just trying to defend it because I was trying to put myself firmly in there, but because I wasn't sure, it was myself that was making myself fit with that category, if that makes sense. So definitely when people almost said the wrong thing, I got overly sensitive about it, because I was like, no, that's not right, this is how it is. I've been like working really hard to present myself for this situation, and to feel like this is who I am, and now you've just completely just wiped it off the plate. And then obviously you sit there wondering what was it that gave it away, kind of thing. So definitely I was definitely sensitive to those kind of situations. And but then that makes you try harder as well, which then is not necessarily a good thing, because you know, you could be binding harder, you know, and that's not definitely good for your back or your, you know, and your bones and your ribs and stuff. And you just do everything, but actually you're just doing it for them, in the how you want to present to them. And for me, in my circumstance, I don't have to try. If I don't identify myself too hard or too strongly, I don't try so hard. So I kind of feel like if I just let it go, but I understand that. And again, to reaffirm that this is not the same for everyone, because, you know, safety wise, some people really do have to affirm who they are fully, because that's the way they navigate. And I suppose I've been quite lucky really to be able to navigate and then start navigating with society, but also feeling within that way as well. So along my journey, but I think I probably feel like, because I've been defending myself for so long, and the amount of stress and burden I had to carry with doing that, why I've become more like, oh, you know, this is really quite tiring.
Yeah.
To uphold these standards for other people was really quite hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I can imagine that. So do you remember what age you were, or what moment it was when you came across the whole non-binary like thing, and like, did you have a reaction? Because for me, I was 26, and
yeah.
I remember I just googled a word I didn't know. I went to Google, you know, I looked it up, and it gave me this whole like long list of like a glossary, lots of different words, and I was reading through. I started to see these definitions, and I just instantly had this like adrenaline rush. I felt really hot and really like this instant recognition, like, oh my god, it's me, it's finally, like, it was so kind of intuitive, and it really explained like how I'd felt ever since I was little. But finally I had it, and I had so many questions, but there was no doubt in my mind that that was me. Did you have a moment like that?
Yeah, I suppose when it came to looking at the transgender umbrella, when I was back in university, that for me was more of a euphoria moment. And I suppose with the whole work I did with proud animals, because I still like I still somewhat put myself in the trans category because I've transitioned in a sense. I've had top surgery, but putting myself then in the gendered category like trans man is something that I've kind of not really grown towards. So when I discovered the whole transgender umbrella category, that I did have like a euphoria moment there. But when it came to non-binary, I suppose because it was kind of part of my work with knowing gender fluidity and non-binary people, trans man, trans woman, and all those kind of categories and all those labels that people may use to identify themselves, to create that space online and to create clothing for them as representation, I kind of already knew about it. And I suppose I'm kind of just moved from like trans to non-binary, but it's kind of almost, I'm still trans and I'm still non-binary, so I'm just kind of using both. And yeah, kind of, yeah, so it's like when people ask me how I identify, I'm like trans and non-binary, but I'd either use trans or non-binary because sometimes I'm not too sure if I'm using them incorrectly. But yeah, I would definitely say so. It feels really good too as well. I think more people could read up on the categories and labels and see how they feel, because they might realise that they actually feel a bit more. There's so many blurred lines, you know, so it's like you can be, so it's all so flowy.
Yeah, and I often say to people, like, you know, there might be like a logical kind of way that words are usually used, but if you, for some reason, it just works for you and your version is just slightly different or slightly more nuanced, then it doesn't matter. Like, I use both labels, trans and non-binary, because you know, for me, I feel like so much of my journey is like a lot of other trans people, where I began and what I was given to begin with was just not really me. It was a sort of an assumption that was made about me that was wrong. And non-binary, because I don't, you know, I don't fit, you know, the man or woman boxes. So I don't know. I just, yeah, I feel like they're both umbrella terms, but it still doesn't exactly pinpoint.
Yeah, because you could be masculine presenting and feel very comfortable that way and still identify as non-binary. You could be taking hormones, had top surgery, you could be cisgender and born, you know, and you just feel non-binary, but you're okay with your body and how it looks. They're very fluid words. If it feels right, like you say, then and you're happy to use it, then we should be using it, you know, for representation of other people. Absolutely, yeah. I agree.
Yeah, so I think it's a good conversation to bring us on to gender neutral parenting. Now, a lot of people don't know what that necessarily means, and some people, when they use that term, they mean that when they parent their kids, they're just making sure that their children have an option of a range of clothes and toys, and to make sure that all children are receiving like the same kind of emotional nurturing and the same, you know, allowing all children to have emotions equally and not treating them differently. But obviously what you do is talking about not labeling kids from the moment they're born and giving them that little bit of space just to reach their own conclusions without having to, like you and I have had to do, to battle through from a starting point that's fucking miles away. Like, the idea is just to give them a blank canvas and let them make of it what they will.
Exactly. So like there's many names for this style of parenting, and there's always some sort of there's different levels as well. So like for me, I interpret gender neutral parenting in a sense that people still gender their children, however, like you say, they treat them the same. So they will highlight any say if the children was stereotyping a certain role to a certain gender, parents will generally highlight that and bring attention to it, to question the children why they're thinking it that way. So say if their daughter said, boys are so smelly, they would question why is it that you think all boys are smelly, and why they're interpreting only boys can be smelly in that sense, or only, let's say, only boys can be firemen. So they'll question that, and then a lot of children will reply with, only boys can be firemen because it's called firemen. You know, if anyone else could be firemen, it would be called firewoman, even if they know that they have friends who are women and identify as women and they are fire people. So it's one of those things where they're still gender their children, but they highlight the gender stereotypes that come with gender, and like you say, they treat them equally when it comes to emotions, and the freedom to have that emotional outlet, instead of, because obviously there is a lot of people who they're quite harder on their boys than they are the girls, and they don't allow the boys the emotional release as much as they do the girls, and they tell them to man up, and we all know all this, it happens all the time. They tell them to man up, boys don't cry and things like that. So it, for them, for gender neutral parenting, it's more just to neutralize the parenting between the children or the sexes. That's what it's called. But for me, I use the term gender creative parenting, where I allow the creative outlook on life when it comes to gender. There's no gender, we don't highlight gender, and we don't categorize anyone into gender, unless they identify that way, and we're happy to do that. But we don't categorize ourselves, and we don't categorize River. And anything they want to, in a sense of, if they want something that's blue, or they want something that's pink, then we just get it. And our choices, our buying choices, are never controlled by River's assigned sex. We just go with whatever River wants, so or what they like. So we identify something they like they were they were making, this is the thing, children make choices from a very young age. So River was like one and a half, and they wanted this ride on car, and it was blue, and then we just ummed and ahed about it. And then, because it was plastic, we didn't really want plastic toys. No, and about it, and about, I think 2 or 3 months later, we went back to the same place, and they really wanted this car, so we bought it. So our choices, is it because it's blue, or is it because it's pink? Our choices are made because River wanted to have this riding car, and oh my god, they haven't left it alone since. So it was one of those things that child really wanted that toy, but any parent could turn around and be like, you can't have that because it's blue, or you can't have that because it's pink. So we just let River have that freedom of choice when it comes to those things, and we don't categorize River into any category, because there's lots of research that suggests, even with, like, say, gender neutral parenting, once you start categorizing children, or categorizing anything, you put one, you can put one against the other, in a sense that's why children still believe that all boys do one thing and all girls do the other. And then, so the categories, children they build a stronger bond to whatever they're categorized with. So even if for one day children were in class, and half the class were wearing red t-shirts, half the class were wearing blue t-shirts, and another group was had free reign of clothing, they started building stereotypes, negative stereotypes towards the opposite group, but purely because they were wearing blue t-shirts. So you can see, and this research was done, I think, over 4 to 6 weeks, and so you can imagine how an impact with children just wearing completely opposite t-shirts. They're treated exactly the same, but they still had negativity towards the opposite group, and that was only in 4 to 6 weeks. So imagine if you gender children from absolute birth, and we wonder why we have gender equality in society. We're putting people in 2 categories, and we're kind of almost pitching them against each other. So we didn't want that for River, and if River ever has siblings, we wouldn't want that for them either. We're pitching them against each other by categorizing them. We're allowing them to have that space, just to be free, to not have anyone treat them in a particular manner purely because of assigned sex at birth, because I really do believe that has absolutely nothing to do with one's gender. And they seem happy and healthy. So I don't think I think everyone should do it, but it's entirely up to what everyone wants to do. Because if everyone honestly believed that children are generally cisgender, then you won't need to enforce it. You wouldn't need a extreme social system to enforce cisgenderhood if it honestly was, that innate. So, and I'm not doing it because I think, oh, River's trans. What I'm doing is giving them that space to have that freedom, like you say, from the onset, that if they were trans or they were non-binary or they were cis, they don't have to fight anything up until they come out. They're just whoever they are until they find out these labels, and then they go through that, and then Bob's your uncle.
Yeah.
We don't have to go through this. A lot of trans people go through a lot of mental stress and mental health, suicide. The same with us non-binary people. We've had to go through all this stress and fighting because we haven't had any words or ability to have the freedom to be able to express ourselves and our identity when we're younger, because we just wore whatever our parents gave us. We could only fight our parents so much to be able to get something like a blue t-shirt instead of a dress or something like that. So that we're doing it in adulthood, but now they get to do it from birth. So yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's the thing, is that I've seen, in any kind of activism, you see lots of people making assumptions, getting angry that we're doing something differently, and a lot of people with concerns that have already been answered in research a long time ago. But I think a lot of people, when they have these concerns, they for some reason believe that they're the first person to have ever asked this question, as if we're sort of like these cowboys just coming up willy-nilly with these ideas, like, let's just do this to children, and as if we haven't thought these things out, and as if it's not backed up by any kind of studies and all that sort of thing. So so I mean, the bottom line, a lot of the assumptions that people make anytime we bring up sort of gender neutral, gender creative parenting is this idea that we're telling children you're non-binary, but it's like, no, that's the idea is that we're not gendering the child, we're waiting for them to tell us. Because
exactly.
you're not having to spend years undoing anything. And as far as I'm aware, unless you tell me otherwise, most kids by the age of 5 are able to voice their identity.
Actually, they're able to put themselves in around 2. So like you can get, so it's actually as early as 2. But when you look at the research, the children are actually cisgendered research. So for me, you have to be quite critical of this. So you say, oh, children can identify their gender by 2. Well, actually, it's just, what it shows to me is actually, if you keep telling them they're boys and girls, by 2 they'll be able to tell you they're a boy or a girl, because the children that were interviewed were cisgender. They weren't there wasn't any children outside of that spectrum to be able to say, actually, all children can. But the recent research of transgender children is they usually will tell you by about 3. So if you tell children for 2 or 3 years that they're a boy or girl, by the age of 3 they can tell you whether they're not. But it's not until 16, 17 before we allow anyone to really transition. And I just think this is how silly it is, because at about 2 or 3 they could pretty much tell you how they identify. But also, if you don't give them words to be able to, if you don't give them words and meanings, they're not going to be able to give you any other description apart from what you give them. So if you only ever say boy or girl, you can't say when they're 14, 15 and they've been on the internet for about 2 or 3 years talking to their friends, researching, reading books, reading magazines, reading news articles, when they'd say, oh, I'm non-binary, that they're not, because you never give them all the words and all the options to be able to say that they could be. And you can't blame their friends, and you can't blame media, because at the end of the day, they've just been given a word with a description that they know it feels like them. So like I was saying, when I was younger, I had to wait until I found the internet before I had a word, because my parents didn't speak about transgender issues or non-binary as an option. All books are very much gendered with a male narrative. So a lot of your children are immersed in male bias. So unless your children's bookshelf has books about boys, girls, non-binary, transgender people, gender fluid people, and things like that, they are by 2-year-old 2 2 years old going to only say whether they're a boy or girl, and it's probably just going to replicate what you've been telling them anyway, because that's what they know, that's what they hear. So yeah, and then by 3 they can tell you, or they can show you that actually they might be leaning more towards the opposite gender, but still you only give them the 2 options. You only give them boys or girls, so you could say actually they might actually just be quite fluid.
Yeah.
And might just want, you need to give the children all the information. If you don't give them all the information, how can you tell them that they can make a choice, a conscious choice? And you can't say, oh, but children can't make a choice at that age. Well, my child was quite able to make a choice about a car and its a toy. They make a choice about food. They make choices every day, but they make choices based on the information you give them. Yeah. So we always explain, people always say, well, if my child had the choice, they'd be eating ice cream every day. But then you probably haven't been giving them the choice that there's healthy options, and we have to give them the information about balance and nutrition, and we can't eat ice cream every day because that's not healthy and things like that. If you don't even talk to them about those, the descriptions within those choices, they're not going to be like, yes, actually, maybe I won't have ice cream today, or maybe I will have a healthy snack. Or maybe children would make choices to have ice cream every day, but then some children make choices to be a boy for the rest of their life, so and a girl for the rest of their life as well. So it's giving them that choice. But for us, we look at all the options and we talk about all the options, and our friends and family and our surroundings are people of all diversities, so they see that as well, because children also see it. The family life generally is 1 male, 1 female, 2.5 children kind of thing. So all they see is that replication. It's just replication upon replication upon replication. And then when children affirm themselves as boys or girls, everyone's like, haha, it is innate. See, we did tell you it was. But it's but gender is everywhere in everything. And until you do gender creative parenting, you don't realise how much it is in everything.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I went through this thing where, I'd never felt comfortable with my assigned gender, but then I thought about, and I've said this before, like, even as a child, before I knew there was any such thing as transgender anything, or I still remember asking myself as a child, am I a boy? I didn't even know that was a thing, but I just knew that something wasn't right, and I was asking myself that question, and the answer was always no. So I was just really confused. And like you say, I didn't have any other information. As far as I knew, it's like someone telling you there are only 2 colours, like red or blue. And it's like they've told you from a young age, you're this colour.
Yep.
And you're like, but it just never feels right. But I only have 2 colours, and if the other one doesn't feel right either, then I must be wrong. Or and but I always say, like, when people like concerned or worried that allowing children to kind of explore and realize these things for themselves, that they're like, oh well, aren't we just confusing them? And I'm like, well, no, because if it was the case that the right kind of conditioning and what's the word, like people sort of educating you, like, this is what you are and this is how this is exactly how it works. If that was effective in changing somebody's mind, then like trans people wouldn't exist, and non-binary people wouldn't exist. And like, if it was that easy to do that to somebody, then it would work for all of us, right? But I mean, when at least 1 in 100 people are trans or non-binary, and they've gone through these very sort of traditional values of parenting most of the time, and they're still popping up and going, well, that wasn't fucking right, then it doesn't matter, if you allow a child and just sort of, from when they're born, like, this is your space, you can, this is how it works, and we're just allowing you a space, like, how do you feel? Then ultimately we can't brainwash anybody to think or be anything. It's like gay conversion therapy. I mean, it's horrible, but even the therapists, the conversion therapists themselves say that it doesn't work.
Yeah,
That it's
exactly.
just hope,
Exactly.
and they'll just keep doing it until it might work one day, but of course it doesn't. I think that these things are within us, and then they're kind of unchangeable.
Mhm, mhm.
And
Exactly. Like you say, as soon as you get all these words and descriptions, because like as soon as children leave the nest, they're no longer yours. The information that they absorb from the outside world is what they will absorb, and they will have questions and they will delve into that and they will find more information out. And when they get into adulthood, they are definitely not yours. So when people start transitioning later in life, it's probably because they've been withheld back a lot of information. So for me, the information's already there and I'm ready to talk about it. And everywhere and everyone talks about gender, you know, especially with River, they get gendered on a daily basis. And I'm ready to talk about it when they're ready to talk about it. It's not a concept that we need to shy away from at all. But like you say, it's not a conditioning, because I'm not always telling River that they're non-binary. I'm not telling them they're non-binary. I'm not introducing River as this is River, they're non-binary. This is, I'm introducing River as this is River, you know, they're 2 years old. And then people ask me, is River a boy or girl? And I say, we don't really gender River, we're just waiting for River to tell us. And so everyone just goes on about their day and they're just fine. And so how they treat River is how they're going to treat River in that moment. And I find that a lot of children are just like, okay, and then they just get on with it. But I'm not telling River themselves like I'm telling everyone. Like some parents would tell their children they're a boy. Well, you should be doing that, you're a boy. Boys don't cry. Isn't he a happy boy? All the boys are over there. So if all the boys are over there and the girls are over here, and all the girls look the same and all the boys look the same, then they're realizing that this is how boys behave and this is how girls behave. And I must be a girl because I look like this, and I must be a boy because I look like this, because parents condition children in a sense that as soon as their children are 1-2 years old and a boy's hair gets too long, they start cutting it off. So it's already conditioned, that child is already conditioned that way. So everyone will socially view that child as a particular gender because they're not seeing their clothes. They're not seeing them naked without any clothes. Their clothes is a representation of their gender. Their hair is a representation of their gender. How the parent talks to the child is a representation of their gender. The toys, even the color of the pram, you know, even prams coming in gendered colors. You can get double buggies now, one's pink and one's blue, because they assume that everyone has one of each gender. So the child could be literally dressed up as a boy but would be in the pink side, and let's say you meet somebody in the street, they'd be confused, they'd be wildly confused, because you have to condition, you are essentially conditioning that child to be socially acceptable and readable, because people are so threatened if they can't understand the child's gender that they feel that you're doing them some injustice by not telling them. And it's like, it's got nothing to do with you, really, has it? And yeah, I think a lot of people, because it challenges their idea of gender, in a sense that because they've been so strongly trying to fight for their identification to be valid, like I was explaining to you I was doing before, that it kind of threatens that ideal. And I think that's what, you know, one of the reasons why trans and non-binary people are so attacked within society, because it threatens their masculinity and femininity of cisgenderhood. Yeah, so I think this whole concept of gender created parenting is just like wildly blows people's minds, because it not only challenges them as an adult, it challenges every generation, any generation. But yeah, still River's 2 and 3 months old, and they hardly ever use any gendered language. And but that's not to say they haven't heard any. So I'm not even, when people say that, you know, you're brainwashing or it's child abuse and things like that, it's just like, well, I use every language, whereas you're telling your child only one language. You know, you're only telling them 1 or 2, which is boys and girls, and this is boys and this is girls, where we're talking about everything. You know, my neighbour's gender River, my well, at the beginning people in the streets were gender River, and it still happens now. So it's not even like it's not even, I think people think because you neutralize gender, you remove it. So I'm not removing it, I'm giving them everything when it comes to gender. I've got friends who are non-binary, who are trans, and you know, drag queens, you know, we watch videos of drag queens and things like that. We watch everyone because everyone exists. So what I'm hoping is with us going to be an adult realizing and knowing everyone exists and everyone's welcome in their world. Whereas the other way around, only boys and girls can exist because this is all I've been told. Anything else after that threatens their ideals because they've never learned it. So then you get adults and teenagers who are threatened by anything when they leave the house and they leave the home and they leave their parents. They're like, "Whoa, hold on a second, where did these people come from?" You know, and that could be a euphoria moment, like, "Oh my god, for me and you know." But then that can also be an attack on somebody's identity because they've been working so hard, they've been told for the, you know, 15 years of their life, this is how it is, and they're trying to put themselves into this category, like you say, because we've been, you know, we felt sensitive at points, and then they might have felt sensitive at points but still feel like they're a man, or they feel like they're a woman but they felt sensitive about not being so good at football. It doesn't make you any less of a man, but they're being told that they should play football because they are a man. Yeah, but I think it by having a child realize that all these people exist, River's going to go into the world as an adult being so welcoming and understanding, because at the moment River calls everyone people, so everyone is a person. So my child has started off with realizing that everyone is a person and we are all human beings, so they don't see a difference in a sense of everyone's boys and everyone girls. They see that everyone are people, and I think that's an important thing to teach children. Everyone's a person, and that's where it starts, and then we go into the categories of what could exist. Let's not start people off as boys or girls, because actually not all boys or girls will eventually assign themselves or feel like boys or girls.
Yeah, love that. It's really sweet. Yeah, thank you for that explanation. It's very, very in depth. It was really good. Something I wanted to ask you is that I've talked before about you were saying like, you know, when you've only been taught there's like men or women, and then you go out into the world and then you're like, where do all these people come from? I've witnessed that exact mindset and confusion and attitude, actually, that, you know, and sometimes so much of what people say when they're confused or annoyed or maybe even angry or being unkind is that so often what they say is, it's almost as if I can almost feel their belief in their mind that to them trans people exist on a cloud somewhere, not in normal everyday life, and not the people on your road and in at your supermarket, at your work or school or whatever. It's almost as if trans people like live on a cloud somewhere, and just every so often we pop down just to kind of ruffle some feathers and piss a few people off. I mean, I'm all for that personally, but that's not what we're doing.
Protest every now and again.
Yeah. And also I think a part of that is they don't realize that like trans people have relatives, they have children, they have families. You know, we go to work, we learn things, and it's just fascinating for me to watch people just become kind of so confused, and then sometimes I get to the privilege of watching the penny drop, and then they're like, oh, I see. And so they kind of realize that a lot of the things they've attached to gender, it's not necessarily how it works for everyone. And one of the things that's really close to my heart is talking about reproductive health, because obviously trans people also have reproductive health. And you know, we might have even had our own kids and kind of been biologically involved in that process as well. And you know, I often find that a lot of my female friends and women that I am in spaces with, they will talk all the time about, you know, women equaling pregnancy, you know, hormonal cycles, giving birth, miscarriage, termination of pregnancy, and all these sorts of things. And there's always a part of me that wants to kind of connect with them through these issues, and then but instantly I'm like, but they're only addressing other women. And you know, you have to ask yourself that question, like, do I want to kind of raise my hand and just remind them that I'm here,
Mm,
or should
mm.
I just let it slide because I'm fucking exhausted?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the
And
difficult thing, because with gender, like I said, when we categorize, when we go back to the children, we categorize them and we just give them colored sweaters, and they form a very connectiveness to their group. When it comes to obviously men and women, they have quite a strong connectivity to that group, so they will express themselves in all women and all men. And then, because a lot of them obviously haven't been exposed so much to alternatives of gender expression, realizing that maybe trans men do want to get pregnant, there's that borderline. It's like, do we step in now, or do we make our own group, you know, trans men and pregnant, and we talk about our issues there? Or do we say, hey, we all get pregnant, well, let's talk about it here? And it's really quite difficult sometimes. Do we step into their, but if we don't step into their box, shall we say, we're not opening them up to be like inclusive. And if we, you know, if we build our own group because it's a lot easier, then we are excluding ourselves. So yeah, I understand what you're saying.
yeah,
It's really quite difficult to sit there when we all go through those. The gender is always like used, you know, synonymously with sex, and sex is usually chosen by reproductive anatomy. So when you think that, gender actually is just to do with reproduction, really. And I think then once you move away from that and say, actually, it's not. But when people have been taught most of their lives that their reproduction qualities, such as bearing children, makes them a woman, then that, yeah, it's quite difficult to then get them out of that box. Because if you are a woman, you identify as a woman, and you can bear children, you know, that's great. But there are women who can't bear children as well. They identify as a woman, and they always have for the rest of their life, but they can't, you know. So there's a disconnectivity there. But it's like you say, with the trans people being on a cloud, it's quite easy to be gender blind in a sense, and being like, those people could be over there, the ones that don't or can't get pregnant, and they can have their own group. But we'll still say that all women get pregnant as our argument for why we're women, and only women who can get pregnant and have vaginas are women. And this is why you have a lot of people who go up against trans women, because then they started using, you know, biology as an argument. But if you look within that group itself, it's not necessarily that way either. So, you know, with intersex people as well, if we start bringing all these in, and we all know about, you know, there's more than 2 chromosomes and things like that. So, but it's quite easy for people to be quite gender blind. Some feminine men might not think they're actually a little bit feminine, because it's easy for them to say, I'm not feminine, I'm very masculine, and I'm a man, and I identify as a man. Especially if they want to attack a trans woman, because they are, in their mind, ultimately feminine. So it's really quite difficult to, in fact, I think everyone should just accept everyone for who they are, rather than trying to push anyone else to be like someone else. If we just accepted that actually, even within our own categories, there are diversity. Yeah, so why don't we just call people? Like you're saying, everyone's a person, and whether they have a beard and they're pregnant, that's up to them. It's their body, and that's how they identify. And if we didn't assign children's sex at birth based on reproductive anatomy, in adult life, it wouldn't be a huge problem, in a sense that you could relinquish the pressure of all women having to get pregnant, when there are some women who can't, and the amount of stress that they have to bear and upset and hurt because they feel like this is their job or this is their position in life. I'm not to say it's going to wipe it out or anything like that, or you know, or people aren't at all. You don't know until it happens. But I just feel like there'll be a little less pressure for everyone to try and conform to reproductive responsibility, shall we say.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I've said before, like, I feel that we socially are in this kind of hangover of, you know, the colonialism and sort of Great Britain and all that bollocks, because you know, it was very much the case that, you know, for the hundreds of years whilst we were fighting over land and going conquering people and mass murdering other cultures in order to kind of inhabit their land, manpower was so important to us kind of winning or conquering like these other poor people. And in order to kind of continue to propagate those numbers and that manpower, we really are talking about breeding our people as kind of cattle. And that's how I feel, you know, by the time that people are kind of this obsessed and they feel very safe and secure knowing that it's just men, it's just women, that's the only way it works, and anything outside of that is laughable, silly, or made up, or whatever. And I feel they are still clinging on to this old idea that yes, we could have hobbies, and yes, we could maybe even try something a little bit unusual, but for the most part we're sticking to this script of, you know, which reproductive role am I going to play, and forget the fact that for the average person who does reproduce, they only really take part in this reproductive role a few times possibly, and throughout all of the years that they're alive, and yet they seem to hang so much of their identity on this act that they do a couple of times. Which, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's not important, I'm not saying that it's not, you couldn't say it's not sacred or spiritual or all the rest of it, but it is still only a fraction of everything that you exist and everything that you are. And yeah, I feel like it's like a proper hangover of sort of the old days when, you know, we needed that kind of manpower. But also I think we've got to a point now where humans are sort of so large in number that we don't have to worry about that kind of thing anymore. And if we go and conquer another land or take over or be dickheads, we've now got technology which is a lot quicker to come by than growing people.
Yeah, no, exactly.
So
And once you
I'm
start
like,
controlling that in the population and things like that, it can get out of hand. You know, like now obviously we can literally know the sex of our baby before it's even born, leads to problems of gender equality before a child has even come out of the body. And you can get situations like where China, where they rather have boys than girls, that you get to this gender side where they start killing off girls because they'd rather have the boy. And this we've always had this strong premises of always wanting boys, always wanting men, this whole, like you say, this whole manpower, which we don't really need, in an essence. But then you end up getting problems such as there's not enough women for these men to marry, say in China now, and there's not enough people for them to connect with, so you have mass amounts of society who aren't able to form relationships on their own because there's not enough, you know, say obviously the amount of these people are, say, cisgendered, there's not enough cisgendered women and heterosexual couples to be able to form these relationships, because they're starting to kill off these girls. So, and you get problems in that scenario. So it gets a bit out of hand, really. And here it's still the same, you know, with these whole gender reveal parties. It's like we all know transgender people exist and we all know non-binary people exist. And you're saying before a child has even left your body, what you want everyone to keep telling that child. But the negative responses for gender created parenting is that we are conditioning our children. In a sense, you're already conditioned. Like I was saying, you condition children to look and act a certain way to be recognised in society. But to start that off, you have to tell everyone how you want to treat them. So before the child's even left, you have a reveal party and you basically are telling people by some certain colours and particular clothes or cake or however many acres of wildlife you want to burn down, I don't know, how you want everyone to, you know, talk to that child, and how you want everyone to interact with that child. And then when those children grow into adults, you get these problems of gender inequality, because, like I said before, you're having these two gendered groups and pitching them against each other, and boys and men have always been positioned in a very in power and control situations, that you always have men who have the inability to talk about their feelings and emotions, who find it difficult to connect with femininity because they've spent most of their childhood realizing to be a man or to be a boy, that they have, and to get attached to masculinity, they have to be the opposite of femininity. And so they're always fighting that. So I was reading the other day that so boys are very immersed in caretaker roles, caretakers when they're younger, and the roles are very much predominantly female positions. So they spend a lot of their young couple of years of their life surrounded by women. And so for them, they don't learn masculinity from men. They learn it by doing the opposite of what the women do and the opposite of femininity. So when they become men who are misogynists, and they lack the connectivity with femininity, that anything that expresses femininity is the opposite to them, and they have to make sure that if it's labeled as feminine, that they don't do it, and that any man that does do it is threatening their masculinity, because it shows that a man can do that and still be a man. And so that's why it becomes problematic for transgender people as well. But then for girls, they spend most of their life in caretaker positions with lots of connectivity, because they basically just have to replicate what they're being told. But their caretakers can connect with them better than they would boys, because it's just the same back and forth, you see. But because girls don't predominantly grow up with a problem of connectivity, when they get into women, it's easy for them to become masculine, and they're quite happy to take on masculine positions, because it's never been problematic for them, because they've not had to fight it. If it's needed to take on a position of power. But for men to relinquish their position of power, for them would be to relinquish their masculinity. So when you start talking about, like you're saying, with gender being controlled, it's a mess. It's a big ball of mess that we all look at. But when we look at, we need men for manpower, they're always going to have this dominant position, which means there's always going to be gender inequality. So men need to connect with femininity, just as femininity needs to connect with masculinity. But then everyone else needs to be able to have the freedom and the ability to be who they are as well, without making someone else feel threatened. Yeah.
So in those examples you were saying, where sort of young boys and sort of babies and toddlers are spending a lot of their time when they're first born or in their sort of formative years, they're spending a lot of their time with female caretakers, and then you sort of described how they look at those sort of feminine traits or caretakers or whatever, and then they know they just have to do the opposite of that. Where does it suggest in your sort of research and your reading that shame or that divide begins? Because I've also read about like other societies where there's no distinguishing between nurturing roles with men or women, and that it's quite normal for like these teenage boys to coo over the new baby in the village or whatever, and they're like, oh, can I hold the baby, and they're so excited and they're very hands-on. And then obviously in our society it's it's a lot more divided. So where does that kind of thing begin?
Yeah, exactly. So I was also reading that in tribes that give neutral nurturing responsibilities to boys and girls of siblings and children, they did grow up to have more egalitarian views when it came to gender and roles and positioning, because they both were nurturing children. For our society, we've always benefited on the ideals that, some people have always benefited on the ideals that men are at the top of the hierarchy and patriarchy is the best and it's number one, and that for this to exist, though, and to this to be the foundation, they have to domineer over. So they domineer over, first and foremost, women. So to have a position of woman is to know that there is going to be a position to domineer over for men. So, but for like boys and girls in that situation, it becomes one of, there needs to be a responsive other people within that area. So it extends more to into schools, more so than more so within the family. Because once children leave school, this is when they start realizing that actually more people can be more fluid, where girls can be more powerful in a situation. And that happens in places like nurseries, say, when there's like a block corner and then there's a home corner. So you have the girls, they migrate to the home corner. This is what they know. They see the parents in the home, their moms who are girls replicating that behaviour. And then the boys are always being encouraged to replicate the behaviours that will be responsive, like to construction, blocks and building and things like that. So they migrate to the block corner. And then you find out once you start trying to blur the lines, once practitioners start to blur the lines to encourage, boys to be more, nurturing and playing in the home corner, there's more defense on these ideas, because that's not what boys do. And in their home life, they don't have babies, they don't have children, they don't have kitchens. That's not what they do. So all this is very early on. All this, you're talking about just the first years of the child's life. You're talking up to 2-3 years old. So once they get into nursery, obviously here, or kindergarten, they're 2-3 years old, and these behaviours are already seen then. There's been a lot of research that watches children in nurseries and then wonder why they're so stereotypical in behaviours, but also in responsive to those behaviours, even if they're displaying, say, feminine or masculine roles within themselves. Like I said to you before, they can be quite gender blind in a sense. So say like a situation where I was reading this one girl was trying to get onto a ledge. She was able to do it, and one of these little boys ran up to try and help her, and this person was watching, observing, and the girl quite easily got up there, but this point the boy was struggling, so a practitioner went up to help. But the boy was explaining how he was helping the girl get up there, because boys help girls, but at the same time was squirming because they couldn't actually get up themselves. So it's one of those situations where that boy needed help and assistance. So sometimes boys do need help and assistance. So it's a situation where when they're told in home how to act and behave, when they get to school, it's easier to see the research that they can display these behaviours of femininity, masculinity, but they won't perceive themselves to be displaying these behaviours, because boys don't display these behaviours, and they don't. But girls could easily quite display masculine behaviours as well, but then they won't see that either. They would only see that they went up to help the girl, but the girl was kind of almost already up there anyway, because that's what boys do. So we've got to think that all these behaviours and stuff are very much early on. This is why gender parenting starts so early. So if you think, you sit there and do all the research as a parent, and you think, well, hold on a second, so it happens early on, and it can go through home life, school life, adult life, media, peers, and things like that. So everyone you surround your children in are the people that, they're looking at is the response to how they should act for their gender. You think, okay, so this has to start early on then, doesn't it? It has to be quite early. So it's okay, let's start it early then. And you think, okay, well, hold on a second. Reproductive anatomy is what everyone keeps assigning sex to, or person's sex to, which then becomes their gender. So you think, well, anatomy is generally something that's quite strong with holding gender, which then we think, but when somebody knows someone's gender, they start treating them a specific way, and they use stereotypes and roles, and they tell them how to act and behave, and they form these ideas that this children should become. So you think, well, okay, so a child's anatomy, then we really shouldn't be telling everyone a child's anatomy if we want to have, equality. So we don't, you know, part of gender creative parenting for me is that only my nearest and dearest know River's anatomy. And then you think, okay, so we want to limit gender stereotypes. Right. The goal is it would be great if we could limit it. If River could be absolutely free, literally be whoever they want to be. Right, that would be great. That would probably mean that I have to stay in the house and not interact with anyone in the whole entire world. So then we think, okay, but if, you know, some days they might be called a boy and somebody interacts with them that way, and might be called a girl one day and somebody interacts in that way, and I and my family and friends, the very small minority of people that they're going to meet throughout their entire life, it gives them the neutral version, then they get all these versions, don't they? So you think we've just been talking about all this stuff, and I've done all the research, like you're saying, and people come up against me about the whole concept. But when we've talked through all this stuff, we need to start realizing that anytime we've felt threatened by someone's fluidity, maybe it's because we're trying to mask our own identity, or maybe we don't feel that we're in a position that describes us enough. But this is not to attack that position, it's to say that we validate your position, and if there's a word that you need to describe it, then tell us, so then we can have that and everyone can have it, everyone can have that idea, and then these children, they can grow up to give us those words, and we'll give them as many words as we got. And I'm hoping, you know, new kids, new generations, they might give us new words when I'm about 50 or something. I'll have no idea what they mean. But, you know, we should accept that, because at the end of the day, it's going to be their world. When they get to adults, it's not going to be mine anymore. So I'm talking to adults now, but it's what world would you like your children to live in, is what I'm thinking. Because at the moment, their world is kind of contained in as much as I can give them. So as much as I can give them the diversity of people, that's what they get. But if I can't, that's the only thing they're going to know. But if I can provide books, let's say, that have a diversity of people, disabilities, race, sexuality, then when they go out there, it's not going to be something new, because they already know it. It's just been in books. So you just give them all the information that they possibly can. So, you know, we're giving them the freedom to know that everyone exists. We're not telling them that their anatomy and reproduction holds any responsibility to their gender. And if they find out that they want to identify as a girl or a boy, and if they identify as a big girl and they don't want to have children, then fine. If they don't want to identify as a boy and they want to transition, then fine. You know, that doesn't hold responsibility for me, and it's not my choice. It's not my body either. And yeah, and we just allow them to have that freedom. I think I'm going around circles a bit again, but yeah, it's like, yeah, it just seems so simple to me, to be honest. But
yeah, I agree. And I think it's interesting that you know, I've talked before about how sort of the gay rights movement happened before the trans rights movement. And people have got to a point now where they realize, like, just because I have a kid with these genitals, it doesn't mean they're going to have this kind of relationship when they're older. And I now see a lot of people my own age, or maybe even older, parenting their kids, and you know, sort of like, you know, literally like children's age in their teens as well, where they'll often say to their kids, like, you know, it's okay to love whoever you love. Like, I'm making no assumptions about that. You know, like, mummy and daddy might be straight, but you know, you might not be. And it's something I've always said, that I wish that somebody had just told me that I might be queer, because it was just a surprise. So I see now that a lot of parents are saying, like, they're open with their children and saying, like, you might love, like, you might have relationships not that are typically reflected in Disney or whatever that they watch. And I'm kind of like, well, it's got that far that people can realize that they don't actually know. But yet there's still such a stumbling block with gender, that actually, just because a child's born a certain way, you still don't know what their gender is going to be. You can either decide to make that easy or difficult. And I think to make it easy for the kid, in a way, you do have to kind of make it difficult for yourself, in that you have to learn and you have to grow and you have to get the hang of you know, trans plus inclusive language as well, just on, you know, depending on the chances of your kid ending up identifying one way or another. But yeah, I really look forward to the day when people can relax as much about gender identity as they do about sexuality, and they realise that actually it's all fine, nothing's gonna fucking fall off, nobody's gonna, you know, like it's all fine. People are gonna end up how they're gonna end up. So so if you've got parents listening now and they're kind of new to this idea of gender neutral parenting, and they're like, yeah, I think I want to, or gender creative parenting, maybe more how you, what do you think are the first things that parents should look into if they want to learn more about this?
For me, I think the main thing is finding the community, like gender creative parenting community. There is one online, and I think because it's quite a strong community, because also it's quite, I wouldn't say lonely in a sense, like well, it is kind of lonely in a sense because you're on your own. You probably could be the only person in your town or city that's doing it right now. So it's lonely in that kind of experience, that you can't just meet someone for a play date, because it gets quite difficult when you're basically immersed in gendered play. You're not on your own. So if you were to start, absolutely, I would find the community online and then make a connection there. Because also, if you've got any questions about anything, even if you just think it's silly, the community is absolutely amazing with forming bonds and connecting people with somebody else that would know. And everyone's like, a lot of people at the moment have quite young children, so I don't think a lot of children are that old just yet. Like, it's so recent of a build of a community that we're all kind of simultaneously going through it together. So you can have a lot you'll have a lot of people who have a lot of experience in a lot of different situations, who will be able to help you. And then anything like that is then finding the resources. So obviously I give you my website, raisingtheybies.wordpress.com. So there I try and keep it up to date as possible, giving my very busy schedule with all the information I possibly can. I'm not there to try and convince you to do it. I think a lot of people are very aware of gender and gender stereotypes and how it affected them as children. Or they might be just thinking, actually, I'm quite content to who I am. But I realise the world exists, it's very diverse. And as I get older, it's going to be more open and diverse. And I want that for my child. And they want to take on gender creative parenting. I think these resources will tell you, you know, what it involves and people's personal experiences. And, you know, there's a lot of, it's not to say that a couple of the articles aren't critical in a sense, so you'll be able to get like quite a valid point if you want to, but also it's your journey, so you could take from it what you want. So like I was saying to you, gender neutral parenting and gender creative parenting, there's like a blurred line, there's extreme versions of each. Some say gender expansive parenting, you know, so there's different names as well. So you can call it what you want, and how you respond to it is entirely up to you as well. Building a community, finding the resources, and maybe, let's say, the extreme versions, you would know where you want to kind of place yourself. You might say, yes, I want to take that aspect from there and that aspect from this side, and I'd utilize that within my parenting. You know, I think a lot of people struggle with the whole like not gendering their children. I think that's the main thing. So I think because it's not socially acceptable, but if we don't challenge society isn't going to change, and we're kind of like in it at the moment. So if you're looking to change things, you need to fight it. I kind of just try and avoid people and I move on. You know, when people say, is it a boy or girl? And I just nod. So then they just make up their mind anyway. So I've got to that point now. Before I was challenging people and telling people every 5 minutes that I was doing gender creative parenting, and then after a while people would just walk off, and you're just like, okay, that was like quick and easy. And then some people start challenging you and you're like, I really need to get to the doctor's appointment I'm going to. Yeah, so it you know, you choose your battles, and then sometimes you get to a point where you just don't care. I think I was very sensitive at the beginning. We talk about sensitivity with trying to tell everyone, but it's not, you know, I don't want to force it on them. I'm just going to allow River to just be River. So yeah, I think people should be able to choose what aspects of this kind of parenting they want to. I know what I want to do, and that's what I'm going to do. And I know how I want to identify, because I know how I feel, and I know what I've experienced in my life when it comes to gender and stereotypes and all that negativity. And I know what I want for my child. And if they came back to me and they say, I identify as this, this, or this, then I'll be happy with that. Even if it was the same as the sex they assigned at birth, and we're talking socially the same as cisgender, then that's fine. Do you know what I mean? Then we go on, and I'm sure they're not going to be bothered. I'm sure that nothing's going to change. This is the thing. Even if they identify as cis, it just makes life a little bit easier. So for anyone, I wouldn't get too overly sensitive, because what you might feel at the beginning might be laughable 2.5 years later, where you think, I actually didn't need to get that hyped up and sensitive about that, you know. Actually that wasn't as bad as I thought it was. So, you know, find a community, find some resources and have a look. I don't know if you want me to send you some information. There's a lot of resources on my blog. There's some books to buy, and that includes gender neutral parenting, and it includes gender creative parenting. So I'm not just saying, I'm doing gender creative parenting and I'm going to talk about that. I give you all kind of, you know, tips and stuff, and I give you information on stereotypes and it's damaging, and how it affects children. And yeah, you can get a lot of resources and information there. And then just try not to be too sensitive about it, but understand there might be a little bit of a fight, you know, and you could end up getting into fights with people that you probably didn't realize that you might not have done. You might thought a lot more open than you thought. I think I've been pretty lucky. I think in my life I've been pretty lucky about a lot of things, where I've got quite a supportive family network and friends. And they don't, I think once I told my friends that I was doing gender creative parenting, they didn't bat an eyelid. They just were just like, this is something that this definitely is you. So yeah, I've been pretty lucky to have that. But remember, there could be people that are even in your close social circle that might have a problem. So how you go about it is entirely up to you, because obviously, like we were saying, I think most people worry. Mainly, it's not socially acceptable to not tell people a person's gender, so they worry they might come across a lot of attacking, like people in public attacking them or things like that. So I can't say from experience I've ever had that. I've had somebody ask me, I've explained it, and they've just left. I've had somebody ask me and I've explained it, and then they've still asked me again. And then, you know, people ask me and then be like, well, what would happen if this situation happened? But I haven't been attacked, so per se, but sometimes online it's a lot easier for people to attack. So maybe be a bit careful there. Yeah, I just, you know, family members. And I think people worry because obviously a child's anatomy or a person's anatomy, you know, is a sex assigned at birth, which then becomes a gender. I think a lot of people worry about people snatching their children and basically declothing them to figure it out, or they worry if their child is naked that everything's just going to crumble and fall apart. But remember, you're adding the neutral aspect, you're adding the alternative aspect. If somebody adds a gendered aspect, then you are still giving them that array of information. You per se are just not concentrating on the gendered aspect. But also, I haven't had my child snatched from any situation, fingers crossed. So yeah, I wouldn't say overly be cautious, but I wouldn't say overly worry about it happening. But that's not to say it never happened, but as far as I know, it hasn't. So yeah, those are the first couple of bits of advice I'd give. Don't panic, find a community, find some resources, decide what you want to do as a parent, your child, your choices, you know.
I think
and
really
email me.
Yeah, thanks for that, Max. I'll include all of your info in the description of the episode, and I'll do some links to your website and your your master's thesis, which was Raising
Oh yes.
Theybies.
Yeah, so that talks about how, so it's very long, and there is a smaller version coming out in a publication, but it basically talks about how people who are undertaking gender creative parenting navigate within this gendered world. So we talk about, you know, the situations they come across with, say, birth certificates and gender birth certificates and giving birth and in the hospital and what they experienced and how they did that, or how they go about ringing for a doctor's appointment for their child. You know, how do they navigate through a very gendered world? You know, government policies and family. You know, like I was saying before, you can have family and friends who you thought are absolutely fine with it, and then they're not. So, and I think you would find, if you can last 15,000 words, because it's got a long one, that actually people will navigate just based on the situation. So it's like they will come across a situation, and it's whatever feels easy and fast in that situation. So say if somebody is ringing a doctor for an appointment for their child and it's an emergency, and that person just starts gendering their child, they might just flow with it until they sort it out, because it's going to take you so many minutes to explain the situation, and then the person might not do it in the end anyway. But your child in itself and in the self is not hearing anything of that situation, so it's not problematic there. So you'll find that actually being fluid in that situation, in those situations as well, might help you within this gender creative parenting or gender neutral parenting or expansive parenting choices that you might make. Is it concentrates on that.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's sort of like it's in shorthand, it's these are the battles you should probably pick.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. These are the battles you'll come across, and this is what people who have experienced it have said that they've done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. I was going to ask
their experience of why they're doing it. Sorry, their experience of why they're doing gender creative parenting as well. So there's a bit of an explanation in there about the terminology used, you know, such as the name, and why one name like gender neutral parenting is not used so much, and these alternative ideas. So it goes through the absolute basics. Really, it is a basic document to explain, because it's so recent of a concept, it explains the entirety of the concepts, and the experiences that the parents are going through, and the children as well within society. So it might be helpful if anyone's starting to read it, because they can see it's from personal experiences. And there was like I interviewed 7 people, so 7 people's experiences there, so you can see similarities, but you can also see the differences, but you can also see the differences of location. So I found like Toronto was very, very open. I was just like, I really want to move to Toronto. There's a lot of families there. It was very open as a place to live, especially when it came to gender creative parenting. The LGBT community there is big, and you know, everyone's just open and loving and supporting. And then you might find there might be one person in the UK having a hell of a time, but it wasn't that bad. Most people actually had quite a good time, but was kind of shocked by a couple of experiences that they had. But it's a good one for people to read, so they can see from a personal perspective of a few people.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, thank you for that. I was going to ask you quickly, actually, because obviously, as a non-woman, you've sort of conceived and birthed your own child, and that's something that I think about doing. And part of that idea for me is actually really wonderful, but at the same time, I wonder how I would cope with pregnancy being such a gendered thing, and then obviously me feeling quite dysphoric about being gendered, but at the same time going through something that I think I would find at the very least fascinating, if not sort of difficult and emotional and cool all at the same time. So how was it for you, like navigating sort of being pregnant and birth and things like that, and at the same time sort of advocating for yourself as a trans and or non-binary person?
That's a good question. I was the same as you, so I had a lot of anticipation nervous, and you know, to begin with, I was just like, do I do this? Don't I do this? Don't I do this? But my feeling is, I haven't had many long-term relationships, and if I wanted to build a family, I had to do it myself at the end of the day. So yeah, it was like, you're pushing on 32 now, you want to leave it any longer, you might not have anyone in the next year or two. I'm not planning on moving it, but I want a family and I don't want to be old. I always said to myself, I don't want to be old. If I can't run with my children, then I can't have children. I'm not having children. I want to be able to play, and be there like my dad did, and have fun with them and run around with them and skate with them and go on scooters and just do wild things. So I decided, I'm going to have to do this myself. So I was like, right. So I had a bit of a Google, bit of a research, and looked at the process of it. So if I was pregnant, what happens, and what might change and how I might feel. And I did this because it's so then I can anticipate these situations, so I can prepare myself for it. But with pregnancy, the changes happen every week. So every week there's a new change. So if you're fast changing with situations, then you'll be good at it. If you're ready from the next week to be a bit bigger and have a different feeling, then you'll be prepared for the situation, no problem. If you're not someone that's who finds that easy to do, then having that information and knowledge, I think, can prepare you for that. And then if you even took it week by week yourself, you research what happened in the first week, you research what happens in the second week. So I did all that to prepare myself, and I think having that foresight made it a little bit easier for me. I personally didn't get, like I said, I'm quite lucky in my life. I personally didn't get overly misgendered. So, but also it's an expectation. It was an expectation for me. It was going to happen. So because I expected it, I was like, I'm going to ride it out. But really I didn't, because everyone who knew me, and because I'm in a small town right now, I just went to work and I came home. I met my friends. I did everything normally I would do within reason, because I got to waddling by the end of it. I couldn't walk very far. But yeah, I think the expectation is that you're going to be massively misgendered, which I don't think happens, because there are a lot of men who have big bellies. So there are a lot of people with beards who have beer bellies. So, if you're a trans person, you just look like you have a big belly. They don't necessarily know it's a baby, right? So in public, they don't necessarily know it's a baby. And a lot of people, I think, don't expect queers or lesbians to have children either. So then you can see sometimes their cogs are like, is it? Isn't it? But they daren't say anything. So they just don't. So they just don't say anything at all. And my friends and family are supportive. They knew that I wanted to do this, and they knew they know me as a person, so they knew it was hard. So they'd ring every now and again, see how I'm doing, and I think the support there was really, really good. My last couple of months wasn't so good on my dad, because my hormones were everywhere. I was a bit of a bitch. And my dad got the brunt of it. Why? I don't know, because he's the nicest person I know. And but I know, and I was just like, I was so devastated, and I was so mean. Anyway, but if you know that's going to happen, right? So I apologized, and I was like mean to him this one time in town, and I was just like, Dad, I'm so sorry. I literally don't even know what my mouth was doing. It was just like, I was just like, I'm not too sure what it is at the moment, but I really have it in for you. I can't handle you right now. And he said, no problem. I really know this is not you as a person, and I am going to keep it as it's just the hormones. So he knew, and he was okay with that. And you see the support there. I realised, and I knew what was happening. I just couldn't stop myself. And he knew and realised what was happening. And so we both apologised. And, it did go on a couple of times after that as well. But then after I'd given birth, everything was fine. So having that support network as well is really quite important. I think if you can have that, or supportive partner, but if you're going in on your own, you are your own support. So note what's going to happen to support yourself in that situation. So if you're mean to someone in town, you go home and you realize that wasn't you, that was you getting through the day, kind of thing. So I think just preparing yourself for that. And then the next thing is body changes, and I thought this was going to be the biggest thing, and it's actually impacted me more now than it did at pregnancy, because I thought, no, my body's changing because I'm carrying a child. And I tried to remind myself. So if you do that, but now because I've packed on the pounds, but I don't know if that's pandemic weight or I don't know, all the ice cream I've been having. Now I have a 2-year-old, jelly and ice cream just comes out my ears. But yeah, it's just difficult. Little snacks in my house. I've never had it before because you need on the go food. So I don't know if that was, it could be that, or I could just be consuming loads of stress or depression. But I just think that I reminded myself that I was doing it for someone else, so that got me through there. But that's not to say that times weren't hard and I weren't crying at night on my own. That happened, and it happens. I remember a period of time, I think it was the second trimester, where everything was a delight. Oh my God, I felt good. I thought everything was perfect. I could have 10 of these kids. I didn't mind. I could have more. It was fine. Honestly, these hormones were all over the place. But that week or two, that was good. I'll have some more of that, because I was feeling off the ground. Like, I was just feeling so good. When they say, like, there's that pregnancy glow. Yeah, that happens. That does that. And you're feeling on top of the world, and it happens because I think if nobody got any of that pregnancy glow, no one would be having kids after the first one. Yeah, but so I think that was a bonus. So that there is positives within it as well, within the process, that you feel good, and you're feeling the movements and seeing the movements of the baby going through the scans, having all the heartbeat tests. I nearly cried. I thought that was so cute. You could hear the heartbeats, and that was so nice.
In the medical system, are they supportive?
Yeah, so moving on to that. So obviously when I had the midwife come round, I explained everything. So she did her absolute best. But she also explained to me how the systems were. So in the UK, the NHS systems are really, really old, and everything is almost titled with Miss to begin with, and they just changed the name. So most of my letters came up with Miss Maxwell Davies. So I was a bit like, okay, that itself just seems so ridiculous that they can't just change it. But they base it on, obviously, as we're talking, gender, reproduction, only women do it, and their title is Miss. So even though my details are all changed on the NHS, it still came like that. So it was a bit ridiculous. But she did try and change it. But it was like when the letters were coming from the hospital, so it's almost like on her system it was all changed. It's like they didn't have a title, so when all my stickers came out, but the hospital itself, they sent me letters with it on. But they really didn't gender me either. They did their absolute best in the hospital, and then once I went in and explained that I'd rather have a C-section than give birth naturally, because I have dysphoria about the whole concept of that. It just makes me panic about the whole idea, and I just feel like I'm going to get so stressed. They were like, no problem, we've not that many times that we've experienced this situation, if not at all. Totally understand where you're coming from. We'll plan a C-section, no problem. So that for me was amazing. And then while I was in hospital, I had this one nurse come in and just question me about being transgender. Like, I think I'd just given birth, or I was just about to go into it. Was one of the two. Anyway, my partner at the time was filming it because they just thought it was so ridiculous. But anyway, she literally just came in and was just like, I just need to ask you something. And I was just like, what? Is this the perfect time to question somebody about being trans, because they've never met a trans person before? It was almost like I was in like a circus show, and they were coming in to look, but they were allowed to ask questions. Anyway, so I felt a bit invaded then. But actually not long after that, I went to an NHS conference where I spoke about trans men in pregnancies, and I highlighted the situation, and the whole room just gasped, right? So they were like, oh, as if like, why would somebody do that anyway? So I explained to them, this is something you don't do. And also, Google is free. You can just go to Google I googled all the information anyway. So I got it, you know, for one staff member who spoke to me, I hopefully changed a room of 30 people. And I had one doctor come in and who just sheed me the entire time, didn't even bat an eyelid, didn't even bother to, I think, look at my notes or anything like that. So yeah, those were the two bad experiences, but the rest in itself we kind of just endured. I was in there for 3 days. I think that's usually the maximum you stay in if everything's quite successful, and it was, mine was like, my pregnancy was pretty textbook, to be honest. So that was okay. I didn't really have any complications. I think I had some in the hospital at the time because I was getting stressed, but that was because they put the, you know, when they started putting the needle in your arm. Oh god, that thing, I hate it. Anyway, they're doing that and this person was a bit heavy-handed, and you're so connected to your child. As soon as you get stressed, the child gets stressed, and River's heart rate just was it accelerated or dropped? Either way, it went one way. I'm assuming it accelerated, and it went so high, way above where it's supposed to be, that they had to start calling the doctors left, right, and centre to start having a look. Anyway, yeah. But on that note of connectivity, as a person who is trans or non-binary or queer, when you're having that child, you're so connected to that child as it's forming. The experience itself is something that keeps you going through. So it's like, but I can only describe it for you, but you're the only one that's going to experience it. So if you want to do it, you're going to have to do it. Like I could sit here all day until I'm black and blue in the face to tell you how my experience was, but yours might be a complete nightmare. But you have a child at the end of it who will love you unconditionally and who will love unconditionally, and you will not understand how your life would, you will not just understand how you would imagine your life without one. Like, you just can't. When I don't have River even just for like an hour or two, it's so quiet in my house. I could be driving out if I'm with a friend and I have a babysitter, let's say, and I just see a digger on the road, okay, and we as adults are just like diggers, right? But since I've had a kid, River loves diggers right now. It's our new thing. And every time we see a digger, we shout digger. And in my impulse then is to shout digger, even if I'm on my own. And you start realizing, oh, I can't do this. Do you know what I mean? You just start doing these things and you start doing all these funny things. And whether your pregnancy is a nightmare or it's a delight, what comes out of it at the end is the cake, what you've been waiting for, and baking. And I think that is worth it. If you know the dysphoria, and it's only 9 months to just come out, 9 months, but it's not the same for the whole 9 months. I think the worst bit is like the last week where you're just like, get out of my body. Do you know what I mean? Like, so and if you think, okay, well, if it's 8 months, not too bad, it's the last week, really, it's worth it. I just say it's worth it personally. I just think it's worth it, and I'm glad I did it. Yeah,
good. Yeah, I'm glad. Thanks so much for sharing that. So you've done your masters. What's next for you?
Yes, I feel like I waffled on. I hope I haven't like clipped your ears off. But so I've done my masters now. So now I'm doing obviously my PhD in sociology, where I'm now obviously, because before I was looking at how the parents have navigated within the gender world, undertaking gender creative parenting. Now I'm going to interview the children, which I'm so excited about because I get to meet the families of people that I've been following for ages, and the children I've been watching grow. And I really hope that I can connect with them and do some really good research with them, and just look into their life and how it is. And I only got my experience, but my experience is not necessarily the be all and end all. So my first year is just going to be reading. My reading list is massive, it's huge. And my second year, then I'm going to obviously probably go to America and probably go to Canada if I can get the funding, so I can interview all these children, because a lot of them are over that side rather than here. It's a couple here, and then once I've done that, obviously it's finishing, and then graduating, and then I hope to then have a career in researching this area and this topic of gender creative parenting and babies, and I feel like it's like the next thing in gender research. It's like a lot of people always have a small section about gender neutrality, but they never go into it, and I really want to go into it. And then I think I start my job in January in advocacy in Birmingham, and I'm kind of debating because of COVID where I'm going to live. So do I want to move down to Brighton and potentially, because my job is only 4 hours once a week. It's a great, because it's only a great course, it's only just started, so I'm not expected to be there quite a lot. So do I, commute 1 day a week, see my family, and then stay in Brighton and live there and be in a bit of a more open-minded community, surrounded by some more like-minded people that I actually know and close to the university? Or do I stay here and move closer to Birmingham, but it'd be a small town, it'd be even a smaller town.
Wow.
Yeah, because it's like, it's not actually in Birmingham, so it's on like on the outskirts, so it's like I'd move a little bit closer but not necessarily all the way there. So I'm like debating now where to live. So I got my job and I got my degree I'm working on. It's just now where to live now. I think that's the next step, is decide there. It's because now I've got two extremes now, so I don't know. And my university course is all online for the first semester, so I really don't have to be there technically until January. Yeah, and after January, so I don't have to, so I've started my course now. I don't finish the first semester until about January, but then that's when I start my job. So if the second semester's online, then my job is online, then I might as well be in Brighton.
Yeah.
Because all the pros and cons lead me to Brighton. My only issue is if my job is not online, how to get up here once a week. So
yeah,
so I'm debating on what to do. Yeah, so but I got a wicked job where it's a beginner teacher role, which is fantastic for me because I only did any guest lecturing, and now I get to teach and design a module, design some assignments and grade them all myself, and it's a fantastic position I got with my university who I studied my masters with. So technically now I studied with Wales and I'm working for Wales but in Birmingham, and I'm now studying in Brighton. So it's like stepping stones really. So I really like it. I'm really excited, and my parenting is just going the way I want it, I think, and I have much to learn, and I feel a lot of parents say the exact same thing. I always have much to learn, but every night I reevaluate how I am that day and how we are and what I can do better for River, and I just go with the flow really. Yeah, so that's good. That's my future at the moment. Pardon?
That's
yeah, exactly.
Thank you, Max.
No worries. Yeah, I think that's like I was saying with the choice about gender creative parenting is because you're the parent, it's your choices, and you will always do your best, and that's all you can do.
Yeah, definitely. Max, thank you so much. I feel like I've learned loads, and parenting is not a big subject of mine, but I'm definitely interested, and I've learned so much. I feel like your brain is like, you've really saturated it with this stuff, and it's just it's amazing how much you know, and how much you've kind of really put it through the academic sort of rigmarole and standards and everything, and it's really amazing. So thank you so much. I'm sure we'll have you on again and we'll talk about something else.
I really enjoyed myself. It's been really good. I haven't chatted your ears off, and I'm definitely, we could do it again in another 6 months and I'll tell you how my parenting's going. And this is the great thing about gender creative parenting, is if anyone's got any worries about how it's affecting the children, then just revisit the same parents and then you'll know. Do you know what I mean? So in it, I saw an article about Storm. I'm digressing a little bit now, but it's on the same Storm, and it was the first article was I'm raising a genderless baby, and then I saw another article came out a year later, and then I found another one that came out 5 years later, and so you can see this progression And it was fantastic, really, because actually it wasn't just Storm that was developing. There was developing within the family as well. So one of the children came out as trans, and another one had, I think, chosen different pronouns as well. And so you can see, actually, this kind of concept isn't just for the children. It develops everyone as well. So I'm happy to come on and have a bit of a chit chat, in a couple of months, in a year, and talk again about what's happened and what's changed. And also in a year, I'll be going into my research, so I'd have lots more to talk about then. But
definitely.
even just a chit chat, yeah, it's been
cool.
enjoyable. Yeah.
Good, thank you so much.
No worries.
Hey, thanks for joining us on this episode. Next time we're talking to Tori Jameson, who is a non-binary Christian chaplain in St. Louis, I believe. And they're really interesting. So in fact, that is the next official episode, and that will be out, I think, the last week of December. But actually, I was wrong. Next week is our Christmas special, and Jordan is back. Yay! I managed to rope Jordan into an episode, and it's very naughty. This is completely comedy and for fun, and we had a great time. It was great fun, and in fact, I would encourage you to watch the next one on YouTube if you can, because Jordan is dressed as a unicorn, and I'm dressed as Father Christmas, or Santa Claus, as some of you may call it. And it was great fun. I tested Jordan on knowing English slang, and we asked each other a lot of questions. From a lot of the answers that we shared, we should definitely be on the naughty list. But it was great fun. I really hope you enjoy it. And that will be out on the morning of Christmas Eve, so that you can do your wrapping and stuff. If you're doing any of that last minute, you can put us on and have a laugh. But just to remind you, it's definitely not safe for children. I think our interviews this season have been, there's been a few swears here and there, but it's not been too much, I think. But when Jordan and I get together, it's just, we're always just so naughty and very cheeky and rude. So I hope you enjoy that one when that comes round. If you haven't already signed up to our mailing list, it's at muxharrishill.com/transection. There's a green box, you put your name and email address in it. I've told you this before, it's okay, but I'm just reminding you, and that way you'll get an email about our releases and anything else we've got going on at the moment. So until next time.